we have with us as key speaker, resource person, Dr. Harikrishnan Bhaskaran. Dr. Harikrishnan Bhaskaran is an assistant professor in the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication at Central University of Himachal Pradesh. His research interests lie primarily in the field of journalism studies, evidenced by his publications in major journals like Journalism Practice, Newspaper Research Journal, Asia Pacific Media Educator, and Media Asia. He sits on the editorial boards of two notable journals, Convergence, of course we know it is a stage one, and Media Education and Practice, Routledge, UK. He actively contributes to the Google News Initiative India Training Network, where he has trained newsrooms and journalism students in data journalism and fact-checking for the past 3 years. He is also doing machine learning for investigations working group member at Cambridge Digital Humanities. On behalf of all the people, all the participants, respective participants who have gathered here, we welcome Dr. Harikrishnan Bhaskaran to the session. Moreover, I welcome all my dear participants. The fourth day of our online FDP session. Today topic that is a quantitative approach in the purview of digital media research. I welcome again on behalf of all the participants, those who are here in the platform. Kindly take over the session.
Topic of quantitative approach when it comes to digital media research. As you can see, this is actually a very wide range or a wide topic where a lot of changes, a lot of work is happening. And if you look at the range of methods or range of approaches which are happening already in digital media research, you can see that it is already depending on existing social science methods like let's say survey research or content analysis, things like that, to more advanced digital humanities approaches like computational analysis, text mining, sentiment analysis, and all that kind of stuff. So my point is that talking about quantitative approaches in digital media research is actually huge. It's a very wide topic. Okay, so handling the whole thing in just 1.5 hours is actually a really daunting task. So what I have decided to do in this session, because I think having more focus on a specific method would be more appropriate considering the gathering here as well as the time available. So what I would talk about is just one of those methods. Okay, and see, personally, as an individual or as an academic researcher, I don't believe much about the difference between quantitative approaches and qualitative approaches, because mostly approaches are approaches, and it is basically the question in your hand or the question which you are trying to answer, that should be what decides the approach. So basically, today I'll be talking about maybe a broader research method or a research approach which is applicable in case of all kind of research, because I'm going to talk about literature reviews and maybe a slightly quantitative approach to literature review. Some of you, or maybe all of you, might have heard of systematic literature reviews. So I'll be primarily talking about systematic literature reviews with the background or within the context of media research, digital media research. So my intention to pick this particular topic is, as I already told you, to deliver something fruitful within the available time. And also what we have seen or what we are seeing in present academia, especially I understand there are PhD students also here and also faculty members here. So everybody has this focus on getting good publications. So my whatever I speak today in this session would be about systematic literature review and about publishability of such studies. Like, if you are conducting a systematic review, what kind of stuff should be there if you are trying to submit it to a reputed journal. So, and why I have decided to talk about this is because I can only talk about things which I have tried doing. Okay, I don't believe in just reading books and then putting it out in front of others as knowledge. So based on my experience of publishing a couple of other publications along with systematic review of literatures, I would today deal with what is systematic review of literature and what are the things to do when you are trying to conduct one, and maybe when you are preparing a publication, what are the things to be concerned about in case of systematic literature reviews. So I hope this will be helpful. During my session, if you have queries, please feel free to post it on the chat, or if you want to interrupt me, you can interrupt me and ask me the questions. That is perfectly fine. I intend to speak for an hour or so, and then we will take questions. Okay, so I hope this is okay with everybody, and I will try to share my screen now. Today we are, as I already gave you the intro, we will be talking about systematic literature reviews, how it can be done or why it is being done, what are the certain specific approaches, or what are some of the standardized methods when it comes to conducting systematic literature reviews. We will talk about some of the publications. We will talk about how reviewers, I mean peer reviewers, look at systematic literature reviews as a publication, and what kind of stuff they look for in it, especially from digital media research perspective. Because when it comes to systematic reviews, they have a larger or much popular application in case of medical research. In case of digital media research, we are seeing that the corpus of studies which are systematic literature reviews are just growing. We don't have actually a huge corpus of studies which are systematic literature reviews in media studies. But now recently the trend is changing. A lot of systematic literature reviews are coming up here also. So we will talk about that primarily. Okay, so I understand we have participants who have different backgrounds. Somebody are already faculty, somebody are researchers, somebody have some experience in researching already. But we will start with a very generic or more general background, so everybody knows what is literature review. It's basically reviewing or revisiting or reading again existing literature, mostly academic literature, and sometimes other kind of gray literature as well, to understand what is the nature of knowledge which exists about a particular topic or a particular question you are trying to solve or something. This is a very typical and integral part of all kind of research process. You cannot conduct a research without knowing what is already existing about that particular topic or issue which you are trying to understand. So literature reviews that way are an integral part of all kind of research in social sciences, in fundamental sciences, in all kind of academic endeavors. So everybody who have a research background is pretty clear about what is literature reviews. So basically, when you review, you identify and describe existing research in a meaningful way. So how do you make meaning about something which is already existing? Mostly by critically appraising. So you look at studies, what is their nature, what kind of patterns are there. So you find that, okay, there is actually maybe a gap, there is some issue with this existing study. So you tend to create this kind of sense only when you critically appraise existing research. So that is where exactly the crux of literature review exists, that you critically appraise existing studies. Now, this is very important to understand, even from the generic perspective of review of literature, as well as in case of systematic literature reviews. Because what I have seen is that mostly researchers are, especially early career researchers or researchers who are just starting up, they have this idea that literature reviews are just summarization of existing studies, which is not the case. Okay, because this anybody can do. Anybody can just read something and say that this is the study about. Now, with the coming of generative AI tools, there are a lot of tools which will easily create summarization. So this is not about just summarizing. Literature reviews generally, as well as in case of systematic literature reviews, are about critically appraising existing research. What is the nature of studies? What are the missing perspective? For example, we see that if we take the case of journalism studies, or if we take the case of general digital media research, which is happening at a global level these days, we will see that a huge chunk of it is coming from the Western nations. Okay, so most of the social setting which is being studied, media systems being studied, audience perception being studied, all are mostly coming from the Western hemisphere of the globe, not much from the global south. So you can see that there is obviously a missing perspective in the existing research. My point is that critically appraising existing studies helps you understand that, okay, there are these kind of gaps which exist. This almost everybody knows. I was just giving you an intro. Okay, so basically, reviewing should synthesize new knowledge, mostly about gaps, but also about other kind of stuff. For example, reviews might help you find effectiveness of an intervention, or it might help you find factors which influence a certain social phenomena. For example, why do, I mean, this is a case study which I will discuss later. Why do people are ready, at least some people are ready to pay for news as opposed to entertainment? Okay, so what are the factors which makes them do this? If you conduct a study, you might be doing a sample of study from a study with a sample from Bangalore, or maybe a pan-Indian sample, but that's it. Okay, but if you are conducting a systematic literature review of several studies which have studied these factors why people are paying for news from different parts of the country, or different parts of the globe, you tend to get a better idea of which are the factors which came up as significant, which influence people's readiness to pay for news. So this is how synthesis happens. Synthesis in terms of literature review happens. We'll talk about this in detail later, but the point is, literature review is primarily about critically appraising existing research and synthesizing a new idea, or a new knowledge, a new understanding of what is the nature of this existing research. Okay, so what we have seen is that there is the typical traditional reviews, which happens everywhere in the sense, if you are a master's student who is trying to write the master's thesis, you would obviously do a review of some of the studies which is available. Obviously, your time is limited, your scope of the study is limited, because you are a master's student, so you would review some of the studies, some of the major studies. Okay, but in case of a doctoral student, they may actually go for a much more comprehensive review. Here, comprehensive means you might try to collect as much studies as possible to review. Okay, so mostly this is what happens with traditional reviews. Even if you're writing a research paper, you would have a review section in that paper. This is what happens with traditional reviews. Now, another approach to reviewing literature, reviewing existing literature, is systematic reviews. These two approaches we will explain through examples. So traditional reviews typically summarizes what is known about a topic, and one issue with traditional reviews is that the way it is structured, or the way it is built up, is slightly opaque. You don't know how one person has written a traditional literature review. For example, if you look at digital journalism, or let's take the case of data journalism. Okay, so there are some, let's say, more than 500 Scopus indexed publications on data journalism so far. So if you are reading a literature review about data journalism in a research paper, or maybe a doctoral thesis, you don't know whether this particular person has already reviewed all this 500 existing literature, or they have just taken some of the studies which are existent and made a review. So this is actually the major issue with traditional reviews, because the way in which the studies are selected, the method through which the review was conducted, is mostly not reported. Or we can say that this method is very subjective. It is according to that researcher. That researcher, or maybe the authors or the colleagues, thought that, okay, these studies are important, so we will review this only. Or maybe they did not know that other studies existed. Okay, so traditional reviews have this problem. You really don't know what was the criteria used for selection of studies, and why certain studies were excluded and why some studies were included. So this is a major issue with traditional reviews. So obviously, the kind of research gaps which you identify in case of a traditional review may be relevant, may be valid, but may not be also, because you can cherry pick. I hope some of you might be aware about this usage of cherry picking. So you pick certain studies and make an argument that, okay, according to these studies, this angle is missing. Okay, so this is an issue with traditional reviews. So let's have a look at, so this is an example. Traditional reviews are also sometimes called a scoping review. because what it does is have a scoping view of existing literature, not a systematic view. That is what makes it different from systematic reviews. Okay, obviously this example is not from media side, but it is a generic paper. It's about what is good mental health. It's a scoping review. Okay, as compared to this, systematic reviews, as the name suggests, are more systematic. Okay, so some people consider the systematic reviews as compared to traditional reviews. You know, as the name suggests, they are systematic. Okay, they are systematic in terms of the way they are conducted, and why they are conducted, and how they are conducted. Okay, so you might know that there are different methods of generating knowledge. Okay, so at a point of time, when kings were ruling, whatever the king says was knowledge. Like that was that was considered truth. So that was actually called the method of authority, because the authority decides what is knowledge. More or less now also that happens. I would suggest, I would agree with that, but still, the scientific method is very different from these kind of traditional methods of generating knowledge. Okay, it is not like somebody says something is true, you believe it. It's not like that. Scientific method is mostly, or not mostly, scientific method is always uh, objective, systematic, and replicable. Because if somebody is conducting a scientific experiment, it is called scientific experiment because somebody else can also replicate it and see whether the results stand valid. Okay, so my point is that some scholars consider systematic reviews as a scientific approach to literature review because it is transparent and replicable. It is systematic because you are clearly documenting the steps you followed in formalizing a research question and identifying relevant literature and analyzing what is existent in them. It is different from traditional review because traditional reviews usually don't report this kind of detail, like why certain studies were collected, how they were treated, how they were analyzed. This kind of detail is not usually available in case of traditional reviews, but in case of systematic reviews, this is what makes them very different. So because of this, systematic reviews are considered an integral part of evidence-based practice, not just in digital media research, but in other kind of research as well, especially medical research. For example, you have a particular medical intervention, you want to see how effective it is, or which are the factors which makes it effective. So you have like hundreds of randomized control trials which happened in different settings. So you conduct a meta-analysis, which is a kind of a systematic review. I mean, put them together, put the all these studies together to see what is the effect of a particular medical intervention. So this is, so you understand. Okay, so this particular intervention is more effective. So this is called evidence-based. This is an example of evidence-based practice or evidence-based research. Okay, so you can see that systematic review are used for this purpose because they are more scientific, they are more systematic in their approach as opposed to traditional reviews. Okay, so they do have systematic and explicit methods to identify, select, and critically appraise relevant primary research and to extract and analyze data from the studies that are included in the review. That is something like a definition. And they are rigorous and accountable because you say that this is how we conducted a literature review and these are the studies which we analyzed. Okay, so that is rigorous and accountable because you have clear documentation of what you did. It is transparent for the same reasons. You say that in our initial search we found some 500 studies, but during a screening you found that only maybe 100 of them were eligible for your question. So you actually are very transparent about these methods of finding and filtering studies. Okay, and sometimes what happens with uh, traditional reviews is that they look at very broader questions. For example, in this case, what is good mental health? It's actually a very broader question. That is why they have decided to go for a scoping review. Uh, but systematic reviews might have more specific questions to answer. For example, this is actually a systematic review which was published in Digital Journalism. This is the example which I gave earlier. Content for free, drivers of fast payment, paying intent and willingness to pay for digital journalism, a systematic literature review. So you can see that this is trying to answer specific questions. Which are the factors, which are the drivers that influence audience decision to pay for news? Okay, so you can see that this is an example of a systematic review, and the earlier one is an example of a scoping review or a traditional review. Okay, so broadly, these two approaches differ in terms of transparency and systematicity, I would say, like how systematic and transparent they are in terms of literature selection and analysis. Now, let's look in detail about, yeah, for the time, this is one of my own publication along with my colleagues in Harsh and Geeta. I think Geeta is already present in the panel. So this was also a systematic review. So we got it published in Journalism Practice. So you might be aware of this journal. This is one of the journals in our area. So I will primarily talk in terms of how we process this a review and what kind of responses we got from the peer reviewers of the journal and how did we got it published and all that. Okay. Uh, so here we were trying to talk about two different approaches. One is traditional reviews and the other is systematic reviews. So within systematic reviews, there are different approaches. For example, uh, this is actually the most popular and mostly used form of systematic literature reviews, which is called meta-analysis. Okay, meta-analysis, as the word means, stands for analysis of the analysis. Means you have already some 20-25 studies which have collected primary data and analyzed a particular phenomenon, variables associated with a particular phenomenon. You, as part of a systematic literature review, is again analyzing these data points by collecting them together, collating them, and doing another analysis. So this is typical meta-analysis. You can see that this is an advanced version of systematic literature review. So here it is not just about collecting literature in a systematic and transparent manner. It is not just about critically appraising findings of existing studies in a transparent and systematic manner. It is also about reconducting analysis or doing a new analysis on existing secondary data, which is extracted from studies which are collected through a systematic manner. So meta-analysis, as you can see, is the advanced form of systematic literature review, but we don't find a lot of meta-analysis in case of media research, especially digital media research, for obvious reasons, because the kind of research questions we usually deal with are more social in nature, social in the sense mostly associated with society, how people perceive things, behave, or how do they use media, or how do media affect them, things like that. Okay, yeah, some of this obviously can be approached or studied through meta-analysis, but mostly you can see that these kind of studies, the social kind of studies, have very varied or let's say different approaches when it comes to the kind of study being conducted. Some of them are qualitative studies, some of them are based on focus group data, some of them are based on interviews with respondents. Okay, some of them are ethnographies. So my point is that meta-analysis is typically a quantitative approach in systematic literature review. So meta-analysis is possible or is done only when we have a corpus of studies which have a homogeneity across the kind of data which is being collected, across the variables which are being studied. Then we can do a meta-analysis on this kind of as a systematic literature review. We don't find a lot of studies like this in case of media research for obvious reasons, but there are. Obviously, for example, this is one of the recent meta-analysis being published, which was published in Environmental Communication. Again, you can see that this is a major journal in the area of environmental communication. The effect of trust in science and media use on public belief in anthropogenic climate change, meta-analysis. This is obviously about how people, how public belief in climate change, human caused climate change, how this is being affected by trust in science and media use. So this was a meta-analysis which was published in 2023. So you can see that there are meta-analysis being published in digital media research as well, but you would see a lot of meta-analysis being published in medical research as well as other kind of uh, application research which is happening in other streams, not much in digital media studies, but still. So you can see that in case of meta-analysis, we systematically combine quantitative study data from several selected studies, which helps you to develop a single conclusion. with a greater statistical power. How does this happen? For example, as an individual researcher, if you are trying to conduct a study, as I told you earlier, the extent, the scope to which you can conduct this study is always limited through several factors. You are geographically limited, especially if you are using a method which involves going and meeting respondents and collecting data. Okay, you are geographically limited that way, and usually resource wise is you are very much limited. You cannot actually have a very comprehensive pan-Indian sample, always or almost the case. It's not possible. I mean, possible but very difficult. So in such cases, when you have this approach, this way of conducting a meta-analysis with several studies which are conducted at different social settings, but which have used similar kind of research design, which have studied similar variables. Now that makes a meta-analysis much more easier to do, but much more capable to bring out very valued results, which are otherwise very difficult to reach. Okay, so obviously the advantages of this kind of approach in systematic literature review, which is known as meta-analysis, is that they have an improvement in precision. Why? Because an individual study may have just 150 sample, but I mean 150 individuals as the sample. But when you are doing a meta-analysis of 25 studies like that, obviously the sample size increases, the spread of the sample increases. So obviously the effect size or the precision of the findings improves. So that is why meta-analysis is very much used in evidence-based research or practices. And sometimes meta-analysis can answer questions which were not posed by individual studies which are part of that meta-analysis, because individual studies might have been looking at another relationship between two specific variables, but your meta-analysis might be trying to answer a different question, or might be trying to understand a different relationship between the same variables. So obviously the meta-analysis can bring out new insights which were not present in the individual studies earlier. Okay, and sometimes there are controversies, some individual studies show very different kind of results, and some other studies show very contradictory results. So if you do a meta-analysis, you could see that sometimes these contradictory results are due to, let's say, sampling bias, or low or sample sizes being used and all that. Okay, so these are broadly the advantages of why meta-analysis is being conducted, but obviously they have their own disadvantages as well. For example, sometimes people do meta-analysis for the sake of doing meta-analysis without looking at the nature of individual studies which are being selected into the corpus which they are studying. Because obviously you can see that in case of media research, you can see that if you have a research paper or a doctoral thesis which primarily collected quantitative data with the help of a survey method, like they created a standardized questionnaire with standardized question items, and distributed it among their sample, maybe individuals, and collected the data. So this secondary data exists there. Okay, as far as a meta-analysis researcher is concerned. But this meta-analysis which uses this data cannot club it with another study which have collected data through content analysis, because both these research designs differ. But there are certain studies which try to mix these kind of different data types and claim to bring out results, which is a problem. It is not a problem with the method, this is a problem with the people using method in a wrong way. But obviously the method also have similar issues, especially sometimes there are within study biases which would affect the results of the meta-analysis which you conduct as well. Okay, so let's move on. My point till this is that there is literature reviews and why they are being conducted, and obviously there are different approaches to it. We discussed the traditional review, and we also discussed the systematic review. And within systematic reviews, there is the most popular systematic review method, which is known as meta-analysis. You can also see that meta-analysis being conducted in case of media research is very less, but there is actually a growing corpus of systematic literature reviews being conducted. Uh, So meta-analysis is not the only kind of systematic literature reviews which are possible. There are there is qualitative synthesis possible through systematic literature reviews. This is mostly the kind of literature reviews you will find in digital media research. Okay, so obviously systematic literature reviews or meta-analysis have wider applications in medical research as well as other areas, especially for policy development. So if you want to develop an evidence-based policy, like what happened during the COVID, because COVID was unprecedented, so nobody knew that what exactly are the preventive measures, what kind of travel restrictions should happen, what kind of other kind, governmental policy initiatives, what government should do, what health department should do. So all these directives gradually derive from evidence-based policy, development, which mostly happens through systematic literature reviews and meta-analysis of existing research. So my point is that systematic literature reviews have a wider application, mostly in medical research as well as in other areas. Okay, and because of this reason, there are several organizations, or let's say protocols or standardizing bodies which exist, which make sure that systematic reviews which are being conducted keep a benchmark of quality. Because what happens is that uh, you see, conducting systematic reviews from another perspective, from the perspective of publications and all that, is much more easier, because if you consider this, you don't need to actually generate primary data because data already exists. You just need to collect existing literature and critically appraise it, which is sometimes much more easier to do if you are not doing a thorough work here. So there are a lot of redundant reviews. This is also one of the reasons why these kind of standardizing benchmarking bodies have evolved. We will look at a couple of them in a moment. Before that, let me just summarize what we have discussed so far. I hope I'm on time. Not much. Okay. So you can see that systematic approaches is more scientific, and the other one is more inclined or biased towards the author's subjectivity. And systematic reviews usually decides the inclusive criteria, what kind of studies are going to be included at the beginning of the study. The other one is mostly iterative. Narrative reviews or the traditional reviews are more iterative, study selection and inclusion happens on the go, not exactly pre-decided. Obviously this involves the subjectivity, increases the subjectivity included in traditional reviews. And because of this reason, systematic reviews usually have a comprehensive search for relevant articles, that you search in a systematic manner and make sure that you reach a saturation point. Okay, but the other case, this need not be always be very comprehensive. It can be just pick and choose. Okay, and obviously systematic reviews have more explicit methods of appraisal and synthesis. The other does not have that kind of explicit methods. There could be methods, but we don't know because they are not mostly reported. Meta-analysis may be used to combine data from different studies, but in the other case, it is not always the case, and traditional reviews cannot be replicated because they are not transparent about how they were conducted. Okay, but still, systematic reviews have some critics. I hope you are aware of positivism as a paradigm of understanding how knowledge, what kind of knowledge is valid. Okay, so positivism mostly is about considering knowledge as valid only if it is generated through, let's say, quantitative methods. That if you count things and validate them, then only it is valid knowledge. Other forms of generating knowledge are may not are not valid. This is typical positivism. You can see that systematic reviews come from this tradition of positivism. Obviously it is, let's say, because it is more positivist, it has certain rigid approaches which might restrict the kind of perspectives it generates. And obviously it has an empiricist bias. Empiricism, again, you might realize, is an approach, or let's say a typical perspective of what creates valid knowledge. Okay, but we'll not go into that. And most of the systematic reviews are very theoretical or mechanical. Now there are a lot of tools which are available, especially AI tools and other kind of tools, which can actually scrap through existing literature and generate a lot of diagrams and tables with numbers and all that, saying that so many publications, so many studies were conducted in so and so time and all that. Which is mostly mechanical, because these numbers does not actually mean anything. If you say that there are 100 studies which were published about data journalism in the last 2 years, it does not mean much. What was present in the study and what was missing in the study, that makes more sense. Okay, yeah, some critics is that systematic reviews for the sake of systematic reviews. Okay, so you are actually developing a literature selection procedure which is very rigid. So your corpus has only, let's say, 5 studies, and you're calling it a systematic review. So obviously you can see that the kind of findings, or the kind of contribution or theoretical build which you can make out of that systematic review will be very limited. But still it is a systematic review. So obviously how you're doing this matters. All systematic reviews need not be actually contributing academically. So this critique exists, more or less this exists in case of all kind of methods, and it's a long hanging fruit. We already discussed that you don't need to actually generate primary data or conduct, let's say, experiments in case of systematic literature reviews, because they already exist. You just need to read through and critically appraise. So there is a lot of researchers who routinely produce systematic literature reviews. Several reasons. First reason I already told you, and then there are other reasons that literature reviews, systematic literature reviews especially, gives you a lot of citations. Because if you create a systematic literature review and get it published, what happens is that others who are working on the same topic, same area, would invariably cite you, because reading your literature review saves them a lot of time, because they don't need to go through all those studies again. So obviously they are going to cite you. So many researchers, especially researchers who are working in institutions which actually incentivize them based on citations and rich index and things like that, would consider this an easier way of citation jacking. Okay, I'm not saying that it is outrightly unethical or anything, but it depends on the quality of reviews you produce. My point is that it is a critique about SLR. Okay, and because of this reason, sometimes there are too many redundant reviews. There is actually a systematic literature review about everything under the sun, the kind of. Okay, anyway, so we will move on further to standardizing bodies. So obviously you might have heard of this Cochrane collaboration, which was formed in 1993, mainly for medical research, especially for systematic literature reviews in case of medical research. So how do they make sure that literature reviews, systematic literature reviews, which are conducted under their supervision, have certain benchmark quality, is that you have to register your literature review before it is being conducted. You need to actually generate a title and your objectives, and what is your search protocol, what is your inclusion exclusion criteria and all that. Then you register, and then they approve, then you conduct your literature review. So it actually avoids a lot of redundancy of similar kind of systematic literature reviews being produced. Okay, so Cochrane Foundation collaboration is there, and obviously they have a lot of resources, handbooks, checklists, things like that, which helps you improve the quality of systematic literature reviews. But what happens is that this is mostly, as I already told you, is on the medical research focus. What we see in social science, especially in digital media research and other kind of media research, when it comes to systematic literature reviews, is that we follow mostly Prisma. I'm not saying that Prisma is only followed by social science researchers; it is also followed by other researchers as well. And Prisma these days, in the sense, in the last some years, it has become very much of an accepted benchmark. So if you submit systematic literature reviews to reputed journals, they make sure, like, if you have followed Prisma, both its checklist as well as other kind of requirements, the paper has a high chance of acceptability. Because once you make sure that you have followed the checklist items of Prisma, your paper would obviously have that basic quality. So Prisma is already there. Prisma is actually something like a collaboration, so you can actually access its website and see its checklist and publications. So Prisma is there, and also there is Moose Group. Or again, it is not from our area; it's mostly from epidemiology and medical research area. But it is also about a standardized body for making sure that meta-analysis being conducted in this particular area have certain quality. Okay. So again, I will not go into the details of Prisma, but they do have a 27-item checklist which is available free on their website, so you can go and check it out. I will discuss some of this during the remaining part of the lecture. I think I am actually running out of time, so I will quickly run through this. Okay, so Prisma mandates that you should have a clear rationale for the review in the context of existing knowledge, like why you are conducting this review, and you should provide an explicit statement of the objective or questions the review addresses. For example, this is an example which is coming from the earlier literature review example which I have discussed. What makes people pay for news? What are the factors which what you call sorry, make people pay for news? So you can see that this is an excerpt from that paper. So you can see that they have briefly discussed some of the existing literature and discussed what is the objective and research question they have. Okay, there are several ways to make up for the losses traditional. Okay, one could be to share the cost with consumers via rigorous paywalls and but under which conditions are consumer inclined to pay despite free alternatives? This leads us to our research question: which factors contribute to the audience willingness to pay for digital journalistic products? So you can see that this particular literature review, this particular systematic literature review, is built on this particular research question. This again another example from my own publication, which I have shown you earlier with my colleagues. So we had some 6 research questions which we formulated the initial part of the paper, based on which we developed a search protocol and selection of studies, things like that. Okay, so there is actually a slight difference between this SLR and this one, is because this was about teaching data journalism. Okay, what kind of research exists on teaching data journalism, and what are the major methods of teaching data journalism as per this research corpus, and what are the challenges faced by academicians and all that. The questions in this particular paper, this particular literature review, looks like they are different from, let's say, in this case, because this was about specifically finding factors which drives a particular social phenomena. But in our case, this was an emerging phenomena. Teaching data journalism itself was an emerging phenomena, and teaching it is again an appendage of that particular what you call phenomena. So we try to explore what is this phenomena. That is why these research questions are mostly based on focused on how this particular research literature has evolved over a period of time, and which were the major publication outlets, and then there are specific questions like what are the challenges and all that. So we actually decided on these research questions because of the emerging nature of that particular topic. Okay, so obviously the basic foundation of all literature reviews and systematic literature reviews is your literature search. So we will briefly look at how to search for literature review literature, and how to document it, and how to report it in your publication. Okay, so all kind of systematic literature reviews should have a clear eligibility criteria. What kind of studies are going to be included in the review, and what kind of studies are going to be excluded? Okay, this again decided or is dependent on the question, the research question which you have in your hand before you start your systematic literature review. For example, if you are going to conduct a systematic literature review on an industry trend, okay, for example, how do news organizations use generative AI tools? You want to actually do a literature review on this. Okay, so you want to do it systematically. So if you are going to depend only on academic journal articles on this, you are not going to find a lot of articles, because this is again an emerging trend, and you are primarily looking at an industry trend. So it takes time for academics to respond to an emerging industry trend, and obviously because of peer review times involved, by the time these papers comes out, it will take at least a year or so. So obviously you cannot depend in this particular example only on academic journal articles for your systematic review. So you might actually look at other kind of stuff, like what we typically call gray literature, industry reports. For example, organizations like uh, in the LSE, Letter School of Economics, have something called Journalism AI. They have a AI training session, or school, and they do bring out reports and studies which are not exactly peer reviewed, but still valid, because they are studying an emerging trend. And you have Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism in Oxford. They also don't bring out, let's say, academic journal articles. They do bring out at occasionally, but most of their output is non-peer reviewed industry reports kind of stuff. So you might need to include those kind of studies in your review, because the basic research question which you are trying to answer is about an emerging industry trend. So my point is that eligibility criteria, or about what kind of studies are going to be included in your literature review and which are not going to be included, is primarily based on the kind of question you have in your mind, or the question which you are trying to answer. Okay. And information sources. So typically a systematic literature review should collect information from multiple sources. Okay, like about databases, mostly indexing databases like Scopus, Web of Science, Science Direct, or Google Scholar, things like that, EBSCO. So there are several indexing databases. So typically, researchers who are conducting systematic literature reviews search in these databases. Sometimes they search in specific resources or sources. For example, I told you about this gray literature or industry reports, which may be important as far as your literature review is concerned. For example, in India, FICCI usually annually brings out a collated report on the status of media and entertainment industry in India. So obviously, if your literature review has something to do with this kind of stuff, you need to actually search in FICCI website or whichever commission agency they have for collecting these kind of reports and including your literature review. So my point is that information sources, identifying them and documenting them and reporting them in your final review is very important. Okay. And obviously a search strategy, we'll talk about search strategy in the coming slides. So you need to develop a search protocol. So what you do usually is that you look at some of the initial studies, or some of the studies which typically fits your literature review. For example, in our case, what happened is that we were trying to understand how existing literature on teaching data journalism, what kind of challenges they are talking about, what kind of methods they are talking about. This was our primary intention. So we actually went through a couple of existing literature which we came across accidentally about teaching data journalism. We found that this particular term actually appears in different forms. Like some papers have only this term, data journalism education. Some papers have only this term called training data journalism or teaching data journalism. So we found that the information which we are trying to find, or the kind of studies which we are trying to find, mention the idea in different forms. So we developed a search protocol accordingly by looking at synonyms or looking at different kind of phrasal existence of this particular phenomena which we are trying to locate, and then used that search protocol to identify, to make sure that we made a comprehensive search to find all relevant studies. Okay, so which I will show you some other examples as well, like how this, for example, this is from our own study. So we followed a three-phase systematic procedure during our literature search. Primarily, we searched in multiple databases: Google Scholar, Web of Science, Scopus, Science Direct, Jester, and Eric. And we used specific keywords: teaching data journalism education, data journalism training, and we used Boolean operators and exact phrase search. Like you can see that this particular query here is placed inside double quotes, so which is a search operator. Some of you might be already aware of this. So when we place double quotes like this, especially on a search engine, usually it looks for the entire phrase, existence or occurrence of this entire phrase instead of individual keywords. So the point is that our publication reported that we used these keywords or these search strings for searching for literature. So this is a typical approach. I will show you another example somewhere here. Yeah, this is another example. This is another study. This was also a systematic literature review on data journalism practices. So you can see that they developed a search strategy where they used different synonyms of the same term and searched in these kind of databases. And the numbers which you're seeing here are the individual results they found from individual databases. Okay, I think I'm running short of time, so I will quickly try to wind up. So ideally, search strategy should have search operators, and you should search across different databases. And you can also do citation based searches. For example, indexing databases typically give you idea about what are the other studies which cited a particular study. So you find a similar work in your area or the topic which you are trying to do systematic literature review on. So obviously you need to look at the studies which have cited that particular study, because that would lead you to more relevant studies which needs to be included in the corpus. Okay, so after doing this, you would reach a saturation. Means you would keep coming across studies which are already in your corpus. So that is where you identify that, okay, your literature search is comprehensive, you have reached saturation. Okay, so this is about developing a search strategy. And there are several issues here, like challenges. For example, most of these indexing databases, for example, all of the indexing databases here except Google Scholar indexes mostly English content only. So this is a problem, because you will be only looking at English language research output. And some of these, especially Google Scholar and all that, sometimes prefers studies which have higher citations. And also, like, when you try to collect literature, obviously studies with more citation is considered more impactful, so you might have a tendency to select these kind of studies. Okay, and suppose you are selecting only one database for searching for studies that is destined to include or bring in database bias and publication bias. Mostly you look at published studies like that. So this database bias is a problem, especially from the eyes of the peer reviewers who are going to look at your SLR paper. For example, when we initially did our SLR, when we submitted our SLR manuscript to journalism practice, one of the issues which they raised is that it does not have major databases. Like, we did not have access to Scopus at that time. So we did not obviously include data from Scopus or Science Direct. So they clearly said that you need to actually include results from more databases to avoid database bias. Okay, so this is a typical kind of response you get from peer reviewers when it comes to systematic reviews. This is from another reviewer. This is about another systematic review. So again, you can see that this review was based on a single database, Scopus. So obviously that is flagged as a problem with this particular study. Okay, so typically studies include more databases to avoid database bias. You can see that this is an example from another systematic literature review. So you can see that they have given very detailed search strings which they used in individual databases. You can see that they have used search operators like exact phrase search or operator and all that. Okay, so I will carry on with this. So basically, one more thing which which is being done as part of a systematic literature review, especially related to searching and finding relevant studies, is to use advanced search features. Usually indexing databases have these options with them, like all kind of indexing databases have these kind of options. For example, you can see this is the interface of Scopus. Unfortunately, this is a premium feature. You would be able to search for these kind of documents only if you have access to Scopus, but I think it must be available in your institution. So you can see that they do have particular search options, like you can actually search for the presence of a particular keyword within article title, abstract, and keywords of a particular publication. So you can see that for a search query like data journalism, I found 490 documents. Okay, so once you have this information, for example, I will show you here. I think this is visible to you. Is it visible to you?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So one issue is that, so it gives you all these details, like it gives the name of the study, where it was published, which year it was published, how many citations it have, and details like this. And typically, systematic literature reviews report it in this format. Like this is a typical diagram or kind of data point which you will find in case of a systematic literature review. For example, this is coming from a study or a systematic literature review about how literature about data journalism or computational journalism evolved over a period of time. So obviously you can see that there were long works in the earlier period, but suddenly there was actually a spike in research on data journalism around 13, 14, 15 period. Obviously this study was done in 17, I suppose. So how do you actually make sense of this in this way? How do you take this data which you get from these indexing databases like this in this form to the form of a visualization is sometimes slightly challenging. But premium databases like Scopus or Web of Science allows you to export this typical stuff. So I hope it is visible to you. So there is an export option here. So here you can actually export the details. For example, here I have 490 documents which I got for this data journalism search. So what I would do is that I would export these details as a CSV file. CSV, if you don't know, is actually a data friendly file format which stands for comma separated values. Uh, when you uh, when you actually download something in a CSV format, this is much more easier to be dealt with or to be processed further using spreadsheet applications like Excel, Google Sheets, or things like that. Or even you can, if you are capable of doing things like R or Python or that kind of programming, the CSV files are much more easier for them to deal with. You can also have other formats like JSON, but CSV that way is very much interoperable. Okay, so once you decide to export these details, what we are exporting here is mostly citation details and bibliographic information. Like you can have affiliations of authors and things like that. Okay, basically this is a checklist. You can actually have the things which you need accordingly. For example, include references would help you create networks and all that. So once you export, you would see that the export would appear as a CSV file. For example, this is the resultant file. So you can see that it has all the things in a much more processable format. So as part of reporting the results of my systematic literature review, what I would do is that I would wrangle this file further, take out this, for example, year of publications, and see how they are, what you call, spread across time, and make a graph like this, like what I have shown you. So this is a typical reporting point which is used by most of the systematic literature reviews, because anyway you have collected literature in a systematic manner, so people, I mean readers, would like to know, and also it makes sense to tell about how this literature corpus grew over a period of time. Okay, so this is how usually this is being done. I hope this is clear for you. And also a couple of things is that filters are available in most of these kind of literature search options like indexing databases. These filters are very helpful. For example, what you see on this side are filters. For example, you can see that among this 490 documents which we have got here for this particular search, not all of them are actually relevant for my purpose. My purpose in the sense, if I am going to include only peer-reviewed uh, articles, so I am only 321, so I can actually filter other things out by checking this particular option. For example, obviously I don't need reviews or book reviews or erratums, things like that. Okay, looks like I have a problem with my connection. Can you still hear me?
Yes, yes, sir.
All right, fine. Okay, so my point is that these filters are that way very helpful in finding what exactly is the kind of results you are trying to get. So this is something which is typically used when you are trying to do a systematic literature review and exporting publication data. Web of Science also has a same interface where it allows you to search and export bibliometric data as CSV or other formats. So unfortunately, Google Scholar does not offer you this option of, it does allow you to search, but it does not allow you to export bibliometric data. There are a couple of scraping scripts which are available in GitHub and all, which allows you to do this. There were a couple of third-party applications as well, but I won't vouch for their security features. But still, otherwise we'll have to manually do this in case of Google Scholar, which is actually a freely available indexing like a service. So yeah, obviously this is the advanced search which is available in case of Google Scholar. And if you are not aware of the manual search operators like the double quotes and all that, you can actually get the effect of it here by using this advanced search. This is again available with Google Scholar. So you have this exact phrase here, or like, where does the keywords occur? Anywhere in the article, anywhere in the title. So sometimes your inclusion criteria is that studies which have data journalism education in the title. So obviously this is one way to search for it. Okay. Okay. So I hope this is clear till this point. I will further. Yeah, okay. So now suppose we have searched for literature, we found almost all literature which is needed. Now it involves going through it and deciding which goes into the final corpus. Okay. Now here again, this is one of the major aspects of systematic literature reviews, because this is what makes it systematic. So because of this reason, I already told you that SLRs are very transparent. So you need to actually clearly mention how this is this was done. So Prisma gives this standard flow diagram which you need to include in case of systematic literature reviews, which makes it clear that how many phases of screening were involved, and how many records were screened, and how many were excluded, and how many were included. Okay, so because of this reason, you need to document all your searches right from the beginning. In case of Scopus and Web of Science and databases like that, it is much more easier because you can easily export your results. But in case of Google Scholar, you will have to manually record these things. Okay, like how many records were identified and how many were excluded and included. So we already talked about exclusion and inclusion criteria. This is dependent on the kind of research question you are trying to answer and why you are conducting a systematic literature review. For example, in case of I already told you, in case of an industry trend, you might include gray literature as well. But in case of another thing like let's say academics related thing, I may not, or the researcher may not include gray literature. They may include only peer reviewed literature. Okay, and obviously duplicate records will be removed. Duplication in the sense of you search something, because multiple databases are involved. You search something in Scopus, you use the same keyword and search in Web of Science. Obviously, both these databases will show some of the results similar. So in the initial phase, like identification phase, the total number of things which you identify will be more, and then you exclude things. For example, if you have limited language proficiency, like me, I cannot read Spanish or other kind of language like German. So obviously I cannot, even if I find index literature in German or Spanish in Web of Science or Scopus, I cannot include it in my literature review. So I will exclude it. So I will mention it here that records excluded which are not in English, records excluded which were duplicates. So my point is that this needs to be followed. This is very important, because sometimes what authors do is that they claim that they have followed Prisma. For example, this reviewer mentions this, that the study claims to have adhered to Prisma guidelines, but at several points it deviates from the guideline, because Prisma has given this very clearly, that what kind of stuff you should include in your flow diagram about how you selected literature for your systematic literature review. So you should follow this as such, so that the paper is much more acceptable, or paper keeps a benchmark quality. Okay, so this is a very typical reporting part of systematic reviews, systematic literature reviews. But in practice, it might appear slightly different. For example, this is coming from a systematic review which was published in Journalism. Journalism is a reputed journal in our area. So you can see that they have given this literature selection details in a slightly different diagram, but still it is relevant, because it has clearly given how did they exclude and how did they include studies, and how many studies were identified at each part of the search. So again, this is another example. Okay, so typically, because this is systematic, typically validity measures are also included in case of systematic reviews. So what usually is done is that at least two people are involved. especially Cochrane reviews and all, mandate that at least there should be 2 coders. Because if you are a single coder in the sense the person who is identifying these studies and deciding whether to include it or not, and at a later stage extracting data from these studies, there is potential individual bias, selection bias involved, because you might be understanding a particular term or a phenomena in a particular way, and might be excluding things which are relevant. But when you have 2 coders or more coders who are working on the same corpus, here by corpus I meant the search results you got, okay, so there is a chance to calculate what was the agreement between these coders, and that will tell you whether this inclusion criteria were internally valid. So obviously, standardized systematic literature procedure mandates that there should be more than one coder or one researcher who enumerates the existing literature and selects what is meant for the study. Okay, so usually Cohen's kappa or similar intercoder reliability calculations are used for calculating coder agreement, even in case of systematic literature reviews. I would say in digital media research, I don't see this a lot, that researchers doing an agreement calculation and all that. But if you can do this, if you can report internal validity as part of your of your selection procedure and all, obviously it would increase the quality of your paper and obviously the acceptability of it further. Okay, so many people have this idea that this is where the systematic literature review ends, that you develop a search protocol, search, find literature, make a flow diagram, and that's it. Later other kind of stuff like network diagrams, graphs and all will do. But that is not exactly the case. Till this point, whatever we did made it systematic, but it is still not a literature review, because to make it a literature review, you need to actually synthesize, you need to bring out something new, especially by critically appraising the existing knowledge, or by doing a meta-analysis and things like that. So typically synthesis is a generic word. Synthesis in case of systematic literature reviews can be quantitative. At that time we call it meta-analysis, or qualitative. Sometimes it is called meta-ethnography, or sometimes it is called thematic analysis. So both these approaches exist within the larger SLR approach. Okay, so in both cases, homogeneity among the studies is a very important thing. You cannot, for example, you can do meta-analysis based on randomized control trials which dealt or which examine similar kind of variables. Okay, as an example which I gave you earlier, you cannot do a meta-analysis with data coming from a study which was conducted using a survey, and with another which is conducted using a content analysis. So homogeneity among the studies in terms of research design, in terms of variables which it included, and the kind of data, for example, the measurement scales being used. You cannot do meta-analysis with studies which used different kind of data measurement. Okay, so that is also something which needs to be considered in terms of synthesis, if you are doing it in a quantitative manner. Okay, so simply summarizing or reporting results from individual studies will not be enough. So there is this typical approach from researchers, because as a peer reviewer I also receive literature reviews to peer review. So what I see is that mostly what happens, people just say that study A says this, study B says this. So it does not make any sense, because we can actually make it understand by reading those studies. But so what is the question? So ideally your literature review should answer this question of so what. So that is where your literature review would contribute theoretically. That is where editors as well as peer reviewers will find that, okay, there is something new in this which can be published. Okay, now you can see that generally this is a misconception among researchers, especially from India, especially from our area, that if you use statistical equations, or if you make good diagrams and all, it is actually a publishable paper. But mostly reputed journals are not looking for that. Journals are looking primarily whether there is substantial theoretical contribution, and this theoretical contribution mostly comes from you telling readers what does this mean in the context of what is already known about whatever phenomena you are studying about. Okay, so this is the synthesis part, which is the most important part of literature review. In our case, in case of our paper, what we have done is that we did enumerate all these things, like how many studies were there and all that. Then we did get into the synthesis part, where for that matter, all these tables are typical forms of reporting as part of a systematic literature review. And all these tables basically come from the data exported from indexing databases and sometimes manually collected. So in our case, what we did for synthesis is that we made buckets, or we made thematic buckets, let's say. So we looked into studies to see what kind of challenges different academicians have reported as part of the studies when it comes to the challenges of teaching data journalism. Okay, we also looked into another thematic bucket. You can see that all these thematic buckets were already decided based on our research questions. So we looked into what kind of methods people are using, academics are using for teaching data journalism, and based on the results of these existing studies, which are the recommended practices. So you can see that this is a way of making sense of what is existent. We are not saying that study A says this, study B says this. What we tried doing say is that when we look at these studies, these are the patterns which emerge. Okay, so my point is that synthesis should typically, now this is just one kind of synthesis. Meta-analysis would have a very different kind of synthesis, where you would use statistical measurements or tests to calculate effect sizes, risk bias, things like that. I will not go into that within this limited time available. So the point is that substantial theoretical contribution is very important. Okay, and obviously when you're doing a systematic literature review, you need to handle a lot of information, especially in terms of the studies which you collect, extracting data. For example, I have already showed you the bibliometric data. Otherwise, if you're doing a meta-analysis, you need to extract other kind of quantitative data. This is all slightly more difficult, and at the time, initial part of doing this systematic literature review, you are not clear about anything. You don't know what is existent in the corpus. So making sense of the ideas present in the literature is very difficult. So typically people do different ways to make sense of things. One is making a literature matrix. This is a form of data extraction. I would say this is more like a qualitative data extraction. You can also use tools like Confidence and all, which would, if you are trying to extract quantitative data, which would do this for you. Like it will extract quantitative data points as per your objectives from existing corpus. But in our case, we were mostly doing a qualitative synthesis from existing studies. So we did it manually. Like we made a matrix. So you can see that we have bibliometric information data here, and we also have other qualitative synthesis. Like we have read a particular study and enumerated which are the challenges as per that study, the recommendations given by that study, and things like that. Okay. One of the reasons why we manually entered this bibliometric information here is because Google Scholar at that time was not allowing exporting this kind of information. So that is about okay, this I will not discuss now because time is over. A couple of tools like are also used for conducting systematic literature analysis, review and meta-analysis. Confidence is actually a very common tool, but premium. It is not available, I think, for free. So it actually creates similar kind of data extraction template. Like what we have seen here is a manual template, but Confidence would allow you to generate what do you call data extraction template, which would extract this kind of data from existing literature. Abstractor is also a free tool which would help you manage literature search for a systematic review. RAN is again another free tool. OpenMeta is also a similar free tool, but it is no more supported, but still functional. One problem with all these tools, as far as we are concerned, like digital media researchers are concerned, is that all of these are meant for meta-analysis or that kind of quantitative approach. And we won't find that many studies or that kind of corpus in digital media research, which helps you conduct meta-analysis. So that way, some of the features in these tools are more helpful for medical researchers or researchers from areas where these kind of meta-analysis are the more potential. And obviously ethical considerations, as I already told you, systematic reviews should not be redundant. Like before you conduct a systematic review, think twice whether it is actually needed, whether similar reviews already exist. Are you just doing another review? So this is something which you should consider. And conducting reviews for the sake of publications, you will get more publications, more citations. Yes, is it a problematic thing? Typically, yes, because if it is not academically contributing to the larger community, yes, it has an ethical problem, I think, though it is not going to cut your increments or anything, but questionable practice, I would say. But obviously, plagiarism is a problem. Plagiarism need not always happen in the form of copying somebody else's paper as such. For example, when you are trying to do a systematic literature review, you might be tempted to copy and paste stuff from the corpus which you are reviewing, and that might, if you are not very aware, it might lead to plagiarism, which can have serious consequences. Okay, self citations as of now does not uh, lead to that kind of serious consequences, but still questionable practice. I'm not saying that you should not cite your own work, but if you are oversighting your own work, especially when you are conducting a systematic literature review, that would be a questionable practice. Okay, I hope this is the end of it. Yes, as I told you, if you are a master student, okay, and the kind of time and resources available with you, and the kind of research question which you are trying to answer is very limited, there is no point in trying to conduct a systematic review, okay, because that is very much limited. So in such cases, you would do a scoping review only. In case of doctoral thesis, because it involves a larger time period and you got more resources, yes, you might consider doing a systematic review, because that makes it a very comprehensive work. And also, when you try to do that, it is something like the cornerstone of the further work. Like, what you are going to do in your thesis is based on a systematic review. Obviously, that increase the quality of it. But then there are other considerations, like, for example, if it is an area, the topic, if something which there is a lot of work is already available, it is going to be very difficult if you are going to do a comprehensive systematic literature review. In such cases, you might need to, if you, like, for example, you are working on media effects, but so you can, if you look at media effects, you would see that there is a huge corpus of work on it. Different kind of media, different kind of effect on different age groups, different effect on different kind of cultural settings and all that. There's a huge lot of work there. You are not able to conduct a systematic literature review on that, reasonably, in a reasonable manner. So, but your thesis might be on a specific aspect of it. For example, effect of social media use among young audience, something like that. Yes, you might try conducting a systematic literature review. Two reasons for this: one, it gives you a comprehensive idea of what is already existent. Second, nowadays you can see that publication requirement is part and parcel of all PhD programs almost everywhere, and also it involves improves your CV, whatever things. So in such cases, if you do have a systematic literature review for your PhD thesis, yes, I think that's a good one. And also, basically, it should be the question in your hand. If you are having a question which demands, for example, why did we conduct this literature review, is primarily because we were, I mean, in my case, I was trying to teach data journalism and learn it also. That's the case with my colleagues also at that time. So we did face some issues when it came to teaching data journalism to students. So we thought that, okay, let's look at what is existent, what other researchers found. So that is why we conducted this. My point is that your question in your hand, that is what decides whether you should go for a systematic literature review or not, and obviously the existing literature also. So this is a problem with which most of the researchers in third world countries, including me, face. We don't have access to premium databases most of the time. There are two issues or three issues here. One thing is that depending only on Google Scholar, all indexing databases have their own biases and issues. Okay, Google Scholar has it more because one thing is that it is more opaque. We really don't know what is actually the basis in which Google Scholar indexes stuff, because sometimes they index very foolish, or I would say very low quality stuff which cannot be considered quality research, and by doing that they are validating certain very doubtful, dubious kind of knowledge as research. So this problem is there. So that is why most of the peer reviewers or reputed journals are very wary of systematic literature reviews, which are dependent only on Google Scholar. Okay. And second thing is that, as I told you, it does not allow you to manually export and have more control over what kind of results you are getting. For example, for certain results, this is applicable to general Google search results as well. For certain keywords, you would see thousands of results in Google Scholar. But if you try to collect all those thousands, I think the results will stop somewhere around 300, because what it shows and what it actually gives us search results is two different things. Okay, so this problem is there. So it may not be that much systematic. This is one of the reasons why reviewers or even journals are very much not very happy with literature reviews which are done only with Google Scholar. Okay, now the other reality is that you don't have access to premium databases. What we have done is that even when we are trying to do this literature review, we do not have access to Web of Science or Scopus. That's the reason why we did not include and Science Direct for that matter. That's the reason why we did not include all these three databases at our initial version of the manuscript. So what we did is that we did approach our friends in other universities who have access to these what do you call it, databases in their places, and we told them these are our keywords, these are the search strings which we want to use, and ask them to export it and send to us. Okay, now when we knew that when this gets published there could be questions that you don't have access to this database, so how did you get to do this systematic review? So in such cases you need to acknowledge, in my opinion, and we did that, you need to acknowledge these persons through whom you have got access to the database and got this data extracted. This is a solution which works one way or the other. Even if you don't have direct friends in places where they have access to these databases, but you might find friends of friends. So that may be a workaround. Did I answer your question?
We have one more question in the chat box.
Yes.
Should I read or?
Yeah,
should
I will take it. I will take it. How do we ensure inclusion of books in systematic? It seems to be journal-based review only. Yeah, see, again, it depends on the kind of question you have. Okay, for example, one issue with books is that most of the books are, I mean, books, in my opinion, is that many books are not peer-reviewed. Okay, so you can see that this self-publication or self-publishing thing is there. It has its own advantages and it has its own disadvantages as well. So being systematic in terms of your literature selection when it comes to books is a very tricky thing. Okay, because how, based on what criteria are you going to exclude certain books and include certain books? For example, you know about Lambert is, or similar fancy publishing labels, I mean titles. So what happens is that if you're going to include a Lambert book, that is going to actually, in my opinion, affect the quality of your review. So this is one of the reasons why what you call books are not often included in systematic literature reviews which are published in reputed journals. But that is not a hard and fast rule. Okay, for example, if you are doing if you are trying to study something where mostly books are available, yes, obviously you can include books, but your inclusion criteria should be very clear. Okay, maybe books which deal with certain aspects of a particular phenomenon, like that. But there is nothing like you should not include books. That is what.
Participants, any further questions, please go ahead. Yeah, there is another question from Ajit Paul.
Yes, inclusion of non-peer-reviewed sources on emerging topics have negative impacts. I hope you meant by negative impact on the publishability of that manuscript. Is that what you meant, or negative impact on the findings? Okay, yes, okay. So no, it all depends on how you are going to justify your inclusion of non-peer-reviewed, or let's say gray literature. Okay, for example, in certain cases you will have mostly gray literature, non-peer-reviewed literature, like what I told you about in case of emerging topics and all that. Okay, so in that case you can always argue that I am including gray literature or non-peer-reviewed literature in my systematic literature review because the topic is like that. Most of the existing important knowledge about this topic is in this format only. So we are including this non-peer-reviewed literature also. But you should be very stringent about as a balance. You should be very stringent about what is your inclusion and exclusion criteria. Why did you decide this particular non-peer-reviewed literature would go into the corpus as opposed to another? When you give this kind of clear argument, mostly people in the sense peer reviewers find that okay, it's okay, because you are justifying your inclusion. Yeah, but otherwise there is no hard and fast rules that or it is not going to 100% affect your publishability just because you have included non-peer reviewed